the purpose of today's webinar is really to discuss issues that impact the effectiveness of IT organizations, and most specifically when we're using standardized process models. So to go over the objectives of the presentation, really we want to try to provide you with an understanding of process throttling and how it can be used to calibrate standard process models to suit your organization. Now, it's there we are. Good. Michael, I thought I had messed up the mouse here. So the number of objectives. One, I wanted to provide you an understanding of process throttling, but also then to show how teams can determine which processes to enhance based on risk, or in essence, the risk profile of your organization. And then also I'm going to try and provide you with an understanding of a model or a methodology for enhancing those processes. So I wanted to set the context here briefly. Really, this can be applicable for any standardized process models. There are many out there, and many can be applied in many different ways. So I wanted to suggest that this is applicable to any model. And really, our focus and examples are drawn from technology and the healthcare industry, for example. And its concepts are also applicable to other industries and areas. So just because we drew on an example from healthcare does not mean it's not applicable to other organizations and to other industries. So I wanted to open up with a discussion simply on various common process models. Now, all projects and all functions have risk. They inherently have risk that we try to manage. And much of that risk is associated with very specific functional areas. Process models have really evolved in response to this dynamic and as a way to really mitigate and manage risk. So as a result, many of today's process models are aligned within a particular niche, such as service management and software development. Now, these vary by industry and environments, but in general, you can see the origins and the sources of many models. So here are some examples that we've all used and probably heard of. PMBOK, which is a project management body of knowledge, and that's managed and maintained by the Project Management Institute. CMMI, which is an SEI construct. Agile software development, and there's many there, Scrum and XP, and also RUP come to mind there. And then the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, or ITIL. Now, many of these have gained broad acceptance and have been applied everywhere, but it's worth considering and understanding the origins of each. So, for instance, when looking at PMBOK, originating from the Project Management Institute, this was established way back in 1969, and its sole purpose was to identify common management processes across the industry. So as a result, this body of knowledge is well-rounded and is thought to be almost process and industry agnostic. It's focused mainly on risks associated with projects, specifically more focused on schedule and budget. But it's often less focused with risks associated with a broader organization or an environment. For instance, handling a customer-facing support issue. If it's not really associated with a project, it might not be in the purview of PMBOK. CMMI comes from the Software Engineering Institute, it's SEI, and it's very risk-averse, and it devotes a lot of controls that are designed to identify and manage risk. Now, this is understandable because this shares its origins from the Department of Defense. So you can understand why there's rigor there to managing risk and to documenting how to handle risk. Agile is really fairly young, although I guess Scrum was created in 1986 in Japan, and it originated in the custom software world. Now, Agile improved communications on software projects by building building smaller chunks or smaller development units with many iterations. And this allowed risk to be better managed with better testing models and more frequent quality activities. But I've often thought of with these approaches, with agile approaches, I often view it as that we're actively engaging risk and actively managing it. So it's, diving into it and managing it as it's identified and used. And then ITIL, or the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, is really a British standard that was created in the 1980s. Now, its focus is on service management, and it was meant to help the UK to better manage its IT vendors. It really is an iterative approach, and as a result, it supports the Deming cycle, PDCA, and also Six Sigma. And its focus really is on managing those larger environmental and organizational risks. So, for instance, example would be managing ongoing vendors or ongoing vendor relationships. COVID is another one that we didn't include here, but that focuses on IT governance and controlling and overseeing IT activities. So as a result, we have a number of standard process models, if you speak, or schools of thought, and each views risk differently, and often that's a result of where they came from. So they're intended to eliminate the inherent risks associated with operations or projects. And as you understand the background and the origin of each of those models, you can understand its view on the risk and how it manages risk in those ways. Now, process throttling really is a fancy way of just saying it's providing a way to enhance these standard processes in order to address assessed, factual, as well as environmental risks instead of just general risks. So if you look at the models from out of the gate, they all have a risk bias, so to speak. And each of them, as a result, bring that bias to the table that we should acknowledge because we are dealing with factual and risks that we understand within our industry that maybe was not considered in the process model when you consider its origin and background. So here's a depiction of that. Roughly, it's a depiction of how it's a crude depiction of how the process models work. If you consider that off to the left, if you consider project cycles or how you would cycle through a project, and also if you contrast that with, say, a level of process detail. When looking at this, you can see an increasing scale of environmental risk. So it sort of talks about how each of the models manage risk in different ways. So for instance, with the Scrum and the XP examples, the Agile examples, they are well suited towards handling it with iterations in smaller chunks. CMMI, as you gain more maturity across the CMMI landscape, handles it with documentation and process steps, more rigorous controls for managing the risk as it's increasing. ITIL, again, is more of a service management discipline, and it focuses on risk with its best practices, and it's more of a long-term approach. It's less iterative than the project cycles, but it takes a longer view, almost an environmental view. And then the PMBOK sort of spans all levels, and it's not really prescriptive, but it has a good general overview of managing risk in general. So as a result, these are often used as a one-size-fits-all, so to speak. And by understanding the bias of a specific process model, as well as how it handles risk, or the flexibility that it enables us to handle risk, allows us to then calibrate and throttle our process models accordingly for our organization. So let's talk about then throttling those processes.